Today I'm suffering from laryngitis, so I apologize for sounding like a frog, but the show must go on because, to make me feel better, McLaren has sent me the craziest thing that has ever been in my driveway. This is the 2025 McLaren Artura Spider. And for 2025, it has received some subtle tweaks here and there. Most importantly, a little bit more power from its plug-in hybrid system and a little bit more refinement in the suspension and the hybrid system's operation. Also, some tweaking to the price tag because this model comes in at $299,508, so about the same price that I paid for the 13 acres that it is parked on. Longtime viewers will know that this is not the kind of car we review on a regular basis here at Auto Buyer's Guide, but I said yes for two very good reasons. The first one is this is going to be the last fun car I will drive for quite some time because I'm going to be taking a break for the birth of my daughter here for at least a few weeks. And afterwards, I'm going to be wandering around with a child seat all the time, and that is not going to fit on the passenger side of this car. Also, the McLaren Artura has a lot of really cool engineering under the hood and, well, you know, the hood in the back and under the hood in the front as well. McLaren has been at the hybrid game longer than some folks might realize. This is in fact their third hybrid, and now this is the very mild refresh of the McLaren Artura, which is why we're taking a look at it again. Up front we have the LED headlights here, lots of cooling, obviously an incredibly low front end. I mean, it's practically ankle height right there, although it does have a storage area under there because that is really the only cargo place available. And that's because the engine is in the back. And that's why we have these enormous ducts just behind the doors that could practically swallow a beach ball. All the major engine cooling is happening in the back. As you'd expect, the Artura has lots of swoopy, sexy lines, but interestingly, none of them will allow you to see the engine. So I'm just going to go ahead and close the tonneau there. You can use it as a really slim storage area if you don't plan on putting the top down. It says no bags back there, but you can put some small items on top of that area, maybe jackets, maybe a really, really thin garment bag, something like that, and it will ask you to verify that it is empty before you close the lid. Now, rather unfortunately, you cannot see the coolest thing about the Artura, which is the engine and hybrid system located in this area here, because it is a rear-engine supercar. Let's dive into that more now. Hopefully we'll be able to get some animations from McLaren so we can show you what's going on here because this is really novel. This is the first production 120-degree V6 engine. Yes, 120 degrees. The more natural angle and more common angle for a V6 to get the best balance is 60 degrees. You will see some 90-degree V6 engines out there that are related to old V8s or just 90 degrees for packaging. 120 is really interesting because that is halfway between a flat engine, a boxer engine design, and a V6 engine design commonly. So why halfway between? Well, it has to do obviously with the really low profile in the back, the desire to get the center of gravity as low as possible, and their simultaneous desire to package the twin turbos right here in the valley of the V. And that's how they get this 3-liter dual overhead cam engine up to a whopping 596 horsepower, 431 pound-feet of torque. That is up slightly from last year where the engine produced 577 horsepower or so. It is then mated to a single electric motor and a dual clutch transmission. That electric motor adds 91 kilowatts. In Freedom units, that's 94 horsepower, 166 pound-feet of torque, to give you a whopping total of 690 horsepower, 531 pound-feet of torque, or if you're in the UK, 700 horsepower. Tying everything together is a 7.4 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack that lives approximately there in the body, just behind the front seats. You might be wondering, why is it a plug-in hybrid? Well, logically, there's some legislative reasons for that around the world. In the US, it wouldn't have mattered, but here, you might as well give it a plug, because if it has a battery this big, you might as well plug it in if you just want to go straight onto a track and have that battery fully charged for your track session, because that is going to give you that extra nearly 100 horsepower versus the engine in its own right. Battery dissipation, the amount of power that a battery pack can deliver repeatedly time after time after time, heat rejection, etc., it's largely a function of the size of the battery, the capacity of the battery pack, as well as the physical size of the battery pack as well. So in order for this battery to deliver that 90 horsepower to the motor on a very consistent basis for track duty, you need to have the big battery anyway, And at that point, you might as well just be able to charge it because it's only a little bit of extra circuitry, only a tiny amount of extra weight for the charge door over here on the driver's side. Everything together, it's going to give you about 10-15 miles of electric range. The big thing, though, is that it smooths out the daily driving, and that's where this is a bit interesting to me, because this is a supercar where when you stop at a stoplight, if you're in the regular drive modes, it will turn the engine off because you've got 100 horsepower. It doesn't really matter too much for daily driving because the electric motor will take over and help fill in for the torque loss that you'd get with turbo spool up. Also, it reduces turbo lag if you are driving it hard, and then it gives you that extra bump of power. The big battery pack allows this to also recharge rapidly. So if you're on a track and you are flooring it and then you're slowing down, flooring it, slowing down, etc., the battery management software is going to try and keep that battery topped up at various predetermined levels based on the drive mode and, of course, how you're driving it if you choose the auto mode. When most people think of a hybrid, they think of a Prius. When a lot of people think of a plug-in hybrid, they probably think of a Jeep Wrangler because that's America's best-selling plug-in hybrid. And if you're thinking about that, you're thinking of a pretty heavy Wrangler. Things are very different in the McLaren because this is the lightest sports car in its class, according to McLaren. Some asterisks there, of course. But importantly, this is just 102 pounds heavier than the McLaren 570S that it essentially replaces. And that model had less power at 562 horsepower and one less gear in its transmission. That one has a 7-speed, this one has an 8-speed. So obviously, some of the weight is also taken up by that extra gear. This will go faster than that old 570S. This one, 0 to 60 in as low as 2.6 seconds if you can get the launch absolutely just right. I'll put the cart ahead of the horse here for just one moment and say this model went 0 to 60 in our testing 3 seconds, and I was able to test a 570S once upon a very long time ago. That did it in 3.1 seconds, and that's all thanks to the extraordinarily light curb weight of 3,003 pounds. It's definitely incredible for something with nearly 700 horsepower and an electric range of 11 miles. It also looks pretty darn cool because when you look at the rear end closely, you'll notice that most of this is open mesh for cooling. Even the area under the license plate, if you look really closely, you can actually see some part of the transmission under there. We have really, really slim brake lights and that tiny little crash bumper that separates everything from one another. Logically, with the engine in the back, the trunk is up front, and it's not the biggest trunk, but I was able to put one 24-inch roller bag inside. The way a supercar sounds is just about as important as the way that it looks, and that's where this is a little bit different, because if we put this in the electric drive mode, which I can toggle with this little toggle right over here, you'll notice we don't get any sound at all. We just get the pedestrian warning system up front and a supercar that takes off from stoplights without so much as a burble or a crack or a pop. But if the engine is fired up, it sounds all kinds of fantastic. But you'll also notice it doesn't sound quite like any McLaren that has come before, and that all has to do with the interesting engine arrangement and the slight changes they had to make in order to make a 120-degree V6 function. Getting in the Artura takes a bit of practice because, of course, we have the scissor lift doors there, and then we have a cabin that is really, really low slung and a sill that's about 8 inches wide. So you really are sitting very inboard in this vehicle and very, very low. Of course, you wouldn't have it any other way in a supercar. Now, as far as driver's seat comfort goes, I found this seat actually a lot more comfortable than I had suspected, although the range of motion is very limited. So if you're much taller than I am, you might not find this cabin very comfortable because this seat only moves rearward maybe about 1.5 inches with this position that I'm in right now. Otherwise, if you want it further back, you'd have to start really tilting the seat back forward more so that we could get it further rearward, and this is actually as far back as it will go. So if you are maybe 6'5", 6'6", not only are you not going to have a lot of leg room, you're probably also going to be looking right here at the top of the roof. It just doesn't go down any further. Oddly enough also, the instrument cluster and steering wheel, which are tied together, don't go up any further. So at my height, I find some of the display actually getting cut off by the steering wheel. Of course, this is all tempered by the reality that I am a lot younger than the average supercar owner and a whole lot poorer than the average supercar owner as well. Because if you decide you don't want to be this low to the ground today, you've probably got a Rolls-Royce and a Bentley and a whole bunch of other stuff to choose from. The McLaren is simply one of the many vehicles that you have in your stable, which is why this model was delivered with a car cover. You can also get battery tenders, etc. like that right from McLaren. I've switched over into electric mode so you can hear me while we're talking about the interior. Up here we have the switches for the rear power window and the power top. The power window is right there, and you can raise it up or down depending on exactly how much air buffeting you want to prevent while the top is down. It doesn't go all the way up when the top is down. That's as far as it goes, but you can lower it when the top is up as well. Of course, obviously power windows there. We have these really, really slim seats here. No additional storage space on the passenger side, but behind the driver's side, there is a tiny little storage area where you can put the instruction manual for the vehicle. These seats are surprisingly comfortable for how thin they are, and they are definitely as thin as they look on camera. The bolstering is not as aggressive as you might think, actually, and that's what makes these seats a little bit more comfortable and certainly easier to get in and out of, although the seat bottom cushion is really quite low, and apparently these oak trees are just tossing oak leaves in here while we're filming this video, so sorry about that, McLaren. We have to vacuum this before we give it back. Moving over here to the doors, we have some storage there. Obviously, you can't store too much in there because of the way those doors open. They don't just swing out. They swing up, of course. That triangle is showing you where the emergency release for the door is located. The regular release is the electric pull right there. We have the Bowers & Wilkins audio system in this model, leather and Alcantara coating absolutely everything, including the dashboard. Center channel speaker way up there. No glove compartment or anything like that, but we do have actual air vents running right across the dash to give you a little bit more of a diffuse air output. In the center of everything, we have a vertically oriented touchscreen infotainment system that definitely gives me some classic iPhone vibes, especially when it's running Apple CarPlay. This is a control knob over here on this side, but of course it is also a full touchscreen. We have our regular media interface there. We do have factory navigation, although the navigation software is a little on the sluggish side. This is where we find things like the driver seat memory settings, and you can program a ton of different seat memory settings. So if you've got a whole entourage that's driving your McLaren, no problem there. We have the VDC system, which is really cool. So here, in order to engage that, we reduce the ESC down there, and then now we have the ability to turn on this system, and then you could choose exactly how much you'd like your rear end to be hanging out when you're drifting. That is kind of a cool touch that obviously we are not going to be trying on public roads. I'm actually sad that I don't have access to a track to give that a really good whirl, so we'll just go ahead and turn that puppy back off there. The one downside to this vehicle is that we don't have many physical buttons at all for basic functions like your climate control. It's all here in the touchscreen, and it's not quite as intuitive as I might like, especially some of the audio settings in here, not quite as intuitive. Below that, we have a slot where you can store your smartphone. You can see that I have my iPhone 16 Max in there, and it just barely fits in that holder. It does have a little grip in there to really keep it in place if you're on a track or something. We have a place where you can put your key or some other small items here on either side of this shifter. Engine start stop button there, hazard lights below. We have one cup holder. It's not a bad cup holder, but there is just one. And then behind that we have a really tiny area where you can store your registration, things like that. That's really the only place. We then have a USB-C and a USB-A input for the system. The only other place to put paperwork would be this little sort of koala pouch right here, just in front of the driver's seat. Up here we have a full cluster LCD instrument cluster. The look changes around a little bit depending on the drive mode you're in, so we should talk about those drive modes now. Over here we have basically engine and transmission drive modes. So it goes from electric to comfort to sport to track up there. As you can see, the display has changed. We now have this big horizontal tachometer. Over here we have the suspension modes. Logically, that would be comfort, sport, and track. We then have the ESC, or electronic stability control system, off button there. Over here, we have a manual mode button, but you can also engage manual mode effectively with the shift paddles here. That keeps you in the DM section or auto M section. So sort of auto until you pull and hold on that, or sorry, manual until you pull and hold on that. The corresponding button on the other side engages and disengages the manual mode for the flappy paddles on the back. So you can have it in drive basically, or you can have it in manual, or you can have it in that AM setting. Logically, when you're out on a track, you're not going to be full throttle all the time. And basically, the times you're not at full throttle, it's going to try and charge that battery as rapidly as possible, so that way the next time you are on full throttle, it gives you all nearly 700 horsepower. Back here, we have paddles for, levers for the turn signal, headlight right there, high beams. Back here, that's that multi-function control I showed you earlier for controlling that infotainment system. There's also a voice command button at the end, really, really thin little stalks there. And then on this side, we find the stalk for the windshield wiper, which is a single big wiper right across the dash. To the left of the steering wheel, which incidentally electronically tilts and telescopes with that instrument cluster coming with it, we find some additional buttons. The most important one is this one right here, which allows you to raise the front end up. Definitely useful on the gravel roads that I'm on here. The lane departure system there, button to lock and unlock the doors, and a button for the frunk. Before we get this out on the road, I need to leave my driveway, and that's where I noticed that the rear view camera shows up in the instrument cluster, which I initially thought was kind of a cool place for it, but there is a problem. Rearward visibility is not the best because of these big humps back here, especially when the top is up. We have a 360-degree camera in the infotainment system, but that screen is quite small. So thankfully they didn't put the backup camera there, but if you have the steering wheel rotated and anything other than straight ahead, it really blocks off a lot of that view. So I found myself trying to, sort of squirrel head or whatever you want to call that, looking around there kind of like a cat sizing up a mouse, trying to look around the spokes of the wheel, trying to see the backup camera. I think that could have been done a little bit more elegantly. One of the things that I've always appreciated about McLaren's lineup is that, yes, they're supercars, yes, they're really low, yes, the suspension is firm, but it's not as unlivable as some high-performance vehicles. So I have to drive on this road absolutely every day, and you can bet that when I said yes to the Artura, I said, I do live on a gravel road. They said, hey, that's fine. And sure enough, it is. It is actually relatively comfortable. Now, this is not a poorly paved gravel road. It's just a gravel road. We maintain it ourselves. We spend a lot of time on the tractor trying to actually make sure that the gravel is as smooth as possible, but there are a few speed bumps and potholes here and there. This handles them really quite well. Of course, it does have the ability to lift up the front end, and it lifts up relatively rapidly, something that you will definitely use in a lot of approaches for driveways, things like that. The only thing that could make the feature more useful is if there was some way to incorporate LiDAR or radar into this system so it can actually read the roadway, automatically lift itself up, or say in advance, hey, you're not going to make it, that is too low. When it comes to ride quality, bearing in mind we're talking about versus other extraordinarily high-performance vehicles well over $250,000, I'll go ahead and give this an A. The Artura is definitely a plug-in hybrid, but it doesn't necessarily drive like any plug-in hybrid that I've driven before. You'll definitely hear the gearbox whine in the back, just like you hear in a lot of high-performance dual-clutch transmissions. In comfort mode, it's going to default to using the battery when it thinks it's appropriate, like right now going down the hill. We're in electric-only operation. And in comfort mode, even when the engine does start, got up to about 42 miles an hour going downhill, decided let's turn on the engine. The exhaust valves are closed. It's really very civilized back there. If I put this in sport mode though, then it's going to keep the engine on longer. It's going to favor lower gear ratios. It's going to sound different. And then it's also going to stop stopping the engine as often. It's going to sound different. And in the more aggressive drive modes, it also obviously isn't going to use the auto start-stop system because that wouldn't be appropriate on a track. We also get that fantastic noise and absolutely insane performance, which we should talk about now. But let's talk about this in the reverse order. This is the only supercar I can think of, actually, well, I guess since the BMW i8, that will do 0 to 60 in about 10 seconds in electric mode. So if you're in the electric mode, you can go up to 80 miles an hour, 0 to 60 totally possible, took about 10 seconds or so in that mode. If you floor it, it's actually pretty eager to stay in electric mode until you exceed those parameters, then it's going to start the engine. So this is the kind of vehicle, if you had a short commute, you could daily drive 10 miles in absolutely electric-only mode. Not everybody's going to appreciate the purity of staying in electric-only operation even when the accelerator pedal is floored, but I think that's okay with me because you can always put it in comfort mode where it's going to bias towards electric operation, but obviously if you floor it, gasoline engine picks up. But there is a bit of a delay. Let's talk about 0 to 60 times in the normal modes now. In the comfort mode, this ran 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds. There is a little bit more of a delay in comfort mode because, of course, the engine is off and it has to start the engine. If the engine is already on, that's about 3 seconds. If you use launch control, you can get a little bit faster. The fastest times that I have seen recorded in this model, I could not achieve. 2.6 seconds is theoretically possible here. The problem is traction. Since this is a rear-wheel drive supercar, even with those massive tires in the back, there's just not enough traction to do 2.6 seconds 0 to 60 on a wide variety of surfaces. You just need more traction, and we don't have it here. On the other hand, we do have an electric hardtop that will let you open or close it up to nearly 40 miles an hour. I believe it's about 37 miles an hour exactly here. And again, if I want to open that rear window while the top is up, so that way I can hear that engine a bit more, you can do that. And there's not really a lot of wind buffeting, so I found myself actually driving around with that open quite often, so you can hear that fantastic sound coming from the back. This engine really does sound fantastic, but again, very different than you might expect because of the design of this engine. That's one of the coolest things here. Now, as far as the rest of the numbers go, 60 to 0 happened in 95 feet. That actually was a tiny bit longer than I had expected. I thought this might actually drop below the 90-foot mark. Again, traction related here, keep that in mind. The road surface that wouldn't let us go 2.6 seconds 0 to 60 also won't let us stop as quickly as you might want. But the brakes are fantastic. The handling ability is just effortless. The steering feels heavy in low-speed maneuvers, but it just comes alive and feels so good on roads like this. You can do things in this vehicle you just don't think should be possible in any car, but absolutely can happen in this McLaren. Handling, absolutely an A+. And what's interesting about that handling is, again, the suspension tune here. I found myself finding comfort to be the best drive mode, and I suspect on a lot of tracks I would still have this in comfort, because track and sport get a little bit too firm and you might find the tires kind of skittering across the pavement. Comfort gives you the right amount of compliance to actually have all four corners gripping the tarmac all the time. That's probably where I would leave it. Cabin noise, 64 decibels in here. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit louder. Keep in mind, this is on our new scale because they repaved the road. We do get a lot of road noise. If you're on a gravel road, you'll really hear the gravel clanking around in those wheel wells, etc. But it's definitely livable. And of course, if I wanted it even quieter, I could close that window back there and have a little bit more quiet and composed atmosphere. Fuel economy, I don't know how much that matters to people that are buying a McLaren, but if you are interested in it, on my daily commute charging both directions, I average 29 miles per gallon. Not half bad, bearing in mind, of course, that that's mainly because the first third of the trip is in electric-only operation, the other 2/3 is gasoline operation, so actual fuel economy is, definitely south of 20 miles an hour. But this is a very light vehicle with an engine that's not terribly big, so as long as you're treating it gently, you actually can get reasonable fuel economy, especially out in the open highway, where the really slippery shape is really going to be advantageous for those longer road trips. Something I would not be afraid of doing in the McLaren. I don't know if I would do this in a lot of supercars, but a longer road trip in this, totally fine, because it's actually really quite comfortable. The seats, the seating position, the suspension, everything is really well done here. The only complaint would be that trunk. There's not enough room for you and your fourth or fifth wife, unless the two of you packed really light. Maybe you're going to the south of France and all you plan on bringing with you is a few bikinis and some Speedos, maybe a sun hat or two. That would fit down there, not a lot else. You're really restricted to just one bag that the two of you are going to need to share. Or, just thinking outside the box here, you probably have people for that, or at the very least an entourage, and you could pack some of your stuff in maybe their Cullinan or something like that. Thanks for sticking around to the end. Bottom lining the Artura is pretty easy. If you've got an extra $300,000 to spend on your next sports car, absolutely put this on your shopping list. For the rest of us, we can only dream about it, or maybe in decades pick one up used. It's an engineering tour de force, and that's why I was really so happy to get my hands on it, because we're seeing more and more plug-in hybrid systems for performance on the market, not just from McLaren, but from slightly more affordable brands, of course, like AMG. AMG has an incredible plug-in hybrid performance system that is available for hundreds of thousands of dollars less than this, but the mission is remarkably similar. It doesn't have the low weight penalty that we see in this. Some of those plug-in hybrids are definitely on the heavy side. We also, of course, find the new BMW M5 with plug-in hybridization for the exact same performance reason. A lot of these technologies are pioneered on vehicles like the McLaren first, and then after time, they trickle down into other vehicles. Think high-performance dual-clutch transmissions that are decent to drive, the original single-clutch automated transmissions. A lot of the development happened in vehicles like this. High-performance plug-in hybrid systems, obviously being developed in vehicles like this because this is McLaren's third hybrid. It's not the first one by any stretch. And over time, we will see more and more of these systems slowly coming into more affordable vehicles. I don't know when the next affordable plug-in hybrid performance car is going to come to America, but there have been some rumors that maybe Mazda would give us one. Who knows, maybe the next generation Ford Mustang will offer some form of hybridization to improve performance. And you can bet that there are other car companies out there working on systems that are remarkably similar in concept to what we find in this vehicle. Be sure and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Find us on all the related channels. And of course, big shout out to Nick and Travis for helping out in this time where I'm going to be gone for a few weeks. And we'll see all of you on the flip side because don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just gonna probably be doing a lot of videos with a screaming child in the background. See all of you later.